Hello, hello. Welcome back. Hi. Okay, we are back to continue our series for this love month. I was feeling very lover boy themed. This is just something I try to do to display my talents or just one of the many one of them in hopes that somebody out there is going to watch this and be part of the next opportunity. All right. And it's fun. So, I've always loved reading, and I'm excited that I'm in my adult life doing things that I love. So, today's story comes from Forbidden Fruit Love Stories from the Underground Railroad. I'm only doing four of these, and so it was kind of hard to figure out which story I was going to read next because they're all so important. But hopefully, this also gives you all a chance to know a new book that you could get and you can read the rest of the stories. All right, so we're gonna read. Last week we did the first story. We're gonna do the third story, and it's called "The Special Delivery Package." The box was a temporary tomb, a chamber of strange tortures, a hole leading to hell. But Lier Green climbed inside it just the same. For 18 hours, it became her world. Actually, it was an old sailor's chest, designed for voyages that might last for hundreds of salt coated, windy slapped days. It was meant to hold trousers and shirts, razors and combs, hairbrushes and quilts, paper and pens, tacks and thread, needles and thimbles, woolen stockings and shoes. It was for Bibles and hymn books, shaving soap and painkillers, not for a runaway slave girl with an average sized body and larger than average hopes. It was too short for Lear Green's legs, too narrow for her arms, too smothering for her spirits. She had to curl up inside it like an unborn child, waiting to crawl out of sticky darkness and yell at her first glimpse of light. She could doze inside the box, but not stretch out, yawn, but not cough or sneeze, twitch, but not fight off muscle cramps. She could daydream about becoming a free woman and wife, but never gulp down enough food or water to silence a complaining stomach. She would have time to worry that someone might kick, shove, or knock her box upside down, sending blood and fear rushing to her head. She also would have time to wonder if the love awaiting her was worth such torture. It was 1857, a year in which the United States Supreme Court decided in the Dred Scott versus Sanford case that blacks weren't citizens, couldn't sue in courts, and had no rights anyone couldn't step on or smash. That year, a prime field hand in the South sold for $1,500. Sorry, a prime field hand in the South sold for $1,300. But a white North Carolinian named Hinton Helper warned in his book, The Impending Crisis of the South How to Meet It, that slavery was morally and economically ruining many Southern whites. Meanwhile, the Farmer's Almanac predicted two eclipses of the sun, and the United States moved ever closer to another kind of darkness, one in which men from the North and the South, with Bibles in their pockets, would kill each other over an idea already coughing and wheezing on its deathbed. In January 1857, at the Worcester, Massachusetts State Disunion Convention, which favored the peaceful separation of North and South, Boston abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison stood up and declared, "No union with slaveholders." However, attorney and editor George Fitzhugh's book, Cannibals All, or Slaves Without Masters, challenged the idea that freedom was necessarily better than slavery. In Baltimore, where men sold their abundant slaves cheaply to men who resold them for more cash in the Deep South, a young house slave named Lear Green settled all these questions for herself. She didn't wait for court rulings, state conventions, or the boom of the battle cannons. She squeezed herself into a wooden chest, which two men carried down cobblestone streets to the nearby Patapsco River. Luck must have ridden in that chest with Lear because the steamer that would carry her and her box to Philadelphia left Baltimore at 1 p.m. in 1854 and 3 p.m. in 1861. Instead of slipping off in the shadows, Lear had to escape in the wide, unblinking glare of daylight, possibly meeting her rescuers in the hallway of her dwelling. The names of the men who helped her carry out this plan aren't known, but Baltimore did have an anti-slavery movement. Rabbi David Einhorn became so identified with it that he was driven out of the state at the start of the Civil War. The home of Black activist William Watkins and his family was an important Underground Railroad station as well. Watkins' niece, Ellen Harper, gained considerable fame by the late 1850s as an anti slavery poet, novelist, and speaker. According to local legend, Orchard Street Church in Baltimore's Druid Hill section also sheltered slaves traveling to freedom. Famed conductor Harriet Tubman's routes of escape from the Eastern Shore usually led from Cambridge, Maryland, over the Big Choptank River Bridge to the Delaware towns of Camden, Dover, Smyrna, Odessa, and Wilmington. Okay, hold on 1 second. So she said, luck must have ridden in that chest with Lear because the steamer that would carry her and her box to Philadelphia left Baltimore at 1 p.m. in 1854 and 3 p.m. in 1861. I wonder what that means. Maybe they'll get back to that. But Lear Green wasn't escaping from a secluded farm or a sprawling plantation surrounded by woods, streams, or swamps. She lived in a row house at 153 South Broadway in the heart of the section of Baltimore known as Fells Point, and her owner, James Noble, ran a butter depot at that address. Married to a woman named Mary and the father of 4 children, Noble was in his early 40s and a man of some wealth. By 1860, he owned $3,000 in real estate and $500 in personal property, owned a male slave, and had a female German servant. Noble's butter depot probably sat on the first floor of the house, and Lear Green most likely lived in the attic, as children, house slaves, and servants usually did in Fells Point. Houses in the area usually stood 2.5 stories high and 2 rooftop dormers. We are reading a story from Forbidden Fruit, Love Stories from the Underground Railroad. From her window, Lear could have seen many things that reminded her of how slavery really looked beneath its sometimes loose-fitting city clothes. She could have seen the auctions in which men, women, and children were sold along with desks and china. She might have seen prospective buyers pinching and squeezing slaves, fingering their skin in search of broken bones or other flaws, like young Frederick Douglass, who had escaped from the same neighborhood 10 years earlier. She also might have seen a young female slave fighting with pigs for offal, tossed out animal snouts, shanks, kidneys, spleens, ox hearts, ox tails, bone marrow, pork bellies, intestines, gizzards, cocks' combs, pig's feet, pig's brain, bull's testicles, and other meat scraps that poverty and necessity transformed into edible food. All of this would have encouraged her to walk, run, sail, swim, or even climb into a wooden box to break from the past. The men who carried Lara Green to the river would have walked down streets ripe with the mingled smells of whiskey, roasted peanuts, coffee, catfish, and perch, and ringing with the shouts of sailors, prostitutes, and slave traders. In Baltimore, men bought and sold slaves on ships, in yards, in inns, and even on the steps of the penitentiary and courthouse. People also could board slaves in a slave jail for 25 cents a day. It was not a neighborhood for anyone who spooked easily. An Irish mob had rioted there after someone stuffed straw into some old clothes to represent St. Patrick and hung it from the mast of an idle schooner. A ship's captain had been tarred and feathered there for lowering a flag, and a man had built his own coffin and kept it in his house for years. It is generally believed that prostitutes were first called hookers when they followed the encampments of hard drinking Civil War General Joe Hooker. But at least one author suspects the word hooker originated in Fells Point. In the middle of the 18th century, the area curved into a hook shape and had scores of prostitutes. Lara Green, however, wasn't fleeing rights or rowdiness. She was running off to meet the man she planned to marry, if she didn't suffocate or swoon inside an old sea chest first. According to a May 26, 1857 Baltimore Sun, and offering $150 for her return, she was an attractive young woman with an impressive wardrobe, possibly her own and possibly her mistress's. The ad said she had a black complexion, was round featured, good looking, and ordinary size. She had on and with her when she left a tan colored silk bonnet, a dark plaid silk dress, a light mousseline delaine, also one watered silk cape, and one tan colored cape. Mousseline delaine, or more correctly, mousseline delaine, I don't know how to say the difference, was a soft, lightweight, high quality wool dress fabric. Usually covered with a pattern. Excuse me, so sorry, y'all. James Noble had inherited fabric. Oh, sorry. Oops. James Noble had inherited Lear from his wife's mother, Miss Rachel Howard, when she was just a child. Lara didn't know much about her old mistress, but the young one left a lasting impression, pushing and prodding her and never giving her any space in which to find herself. Yet she bore it until a young man named William Adams stepped into her life and challenged her to change it. Adams was a barber, but worked mostly in taverns, opening oysters and performing other tasks. Many blacks cut hair, but a black barber with a white clientele needed special qualities, including the ability to keep his own feelings out of the discussions swirling around him and to tell white men what they wanted to hear. When George de Baptiste, a barber and caterer, worked as an Underground Railroad conductor in Madison, Indiana, slave owners often teased de Baptiste about being a secret agent for the Underground Railroad. De Baptiste would just laugh and say he wasn't smart enough for that. However, William Adams, Laird Green's love, apparently wasn't that skilled at disguising his intentions. Hey, hey, here you come. Come on, no thank you. No thanks. You see me doing a bit? All right. Where was I? Do-do-do-do. Okay, he stood about 5 feet 10 inches tall and had a 4 inch scar running by the corner of his mouth and was described as fast talking. Loose talking might have been a more accurate description. The slave ad for Lair Green noted that people had overheard William Adams saying he was going to marry Lair and move to New York, where his mother, a free black woman, lived. According to James Noble's ad, Adams had been missing for about a week when Lair Green, just like that, disappeared too. An Underground Railroad conductor, William Still's account of Lair's escape. The young woman decided she needed to be free to fill the station of a wife and mother. In author Sylvia Dannett's version of this story, Lair was at first afraid to run off with William, but after he left Baltimore, the ugliness and emptiness of Lair's life oppressed her. Her mistress kept demanding more and more tasks from her, and the day finally came when Lair felt she could take no more. After learning that William had reached Elmira, she decided to join him. According to Dannett, Lair managed to get word to Baltimore Quakers active in the Underground Railroad, and they concocted the plan to carry her to freedom in a sea chest, probably marching right past slave dealers and slave catchers. She was, of course, not the only slave who had been stuffed inside a box and shipped to the North as freight or luggage. In 1845, an unnamed Negro servant girl had been boxed up and mailed to New York, Pennsylvania. No, sorry, to York, Pennsylvania. This was 4 years before Henry Box Brown became famous for being shipped in a box for a 25-hour journey from Richmond, Virginia to Philadelphia, traveling upside down most of the time. A relative stuck a Baltimore man named William Peel Jones into a box and sent him to Philadelphia on an Erickson steamer. Jones nearly gave himself away by coughing inside his container. In the winter of 1857, a young pregnant seamstress clambered into a box lined with straw in Baltimore and spent nearly all of one night in the depot, upside down more than once. When finally freed in Philadelphia, she spent 3 days struggling to regain her ability to talk with ease. However, escaping in such a dangerous way required considerable courage and meant the 18-year-old Laird Green would have to mature overnight. After searching her soul, she apparently decided she had what it took to endure 18 hours coiled up in a chest, an act that still compared to cutting off the right arm or plucking out the right eye. It only took the men carrying Laird's chest a few minutes to reach Light and Pratt Streets on the edge of the river, some 3 or 4 blocks from Laird's residence. In the 1850s, this was the spot where the Philadelphia bound Erickson Line steamships docked in the Patapsco River, an arm of the Chesapeake Bay. Erickson steam waters Erickson steamers were driven by underwater propellers instead of the wider paddle wheels, which steadied ships and made it possible for large steamers to pass through the narrow gated chambers or locks that raised and lowered ships moving through the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal. Strong ropes fastened the chest, which was stowed with the freight on the steamboat. Layard, of course, had none of the conveniences available to contemporary researchers who retraced the escape routes of fugitive slaves. She had no cell phone for emergencies, no backpack crammed with extra rations, no sports drinks, no protein bars. She brought nothing with her but a quilt, a pillow, a few pieces of clothes, a small amount of food, a bottle of water, and a pound or two of courage. Like other slaves who escaped as freight or luggage, she would have abstained from eating and drunk only an occasional sip of water to lessen her need to eliminate waste. To recreate the experiences of fugitives like Laird Green, researcher Anthony Cohen climbed inside a wooden crate in May 2002 and had himself shipped on a train from Philadelphia to New York. During his 2 hour ordeal, he sweated so furiously that he stripped down to his boxer shorts, but it didn't help. Moisture condensed on the box's screw plates and dripped from the ceiling. By the time he stepped out of his box, the heat had wrung him dry and he had drained his water bottle. Imagine what might have happened if, like Laird Green, he had stayed in his box for another 16 hours. Fortunately, Laird Green's fiance's mother, a free black woman, came along as a passenger on the boat ferrying Laird to freedom. Like other black passengers, she was assigned to the deck, which put her near the sailor's chest. Once or twice during the night, she untied the ropes circling the chest and lifted the lid, allowing Laird a chance to snatch a lungful of air. The two women later told William Still they had shared a silent prayer that their time of peril would soon end. However, sometime that night, some disturbing thoughts must have stomped around in Laird Green's head. She must have sniffed at least a whiff of raw fear. There must have been at least a moment when she longed to leap out of a chest that looked way too much like a coffin. Finally, the steamer reached Pier 3 south of the Philadelphia wharf where Erickson's ships docked. After crewmen carried the chest off the boat, it was delivered to a house on Barley Street, occupied by friends of William Adams' mother. The chest and its occupants then moved to the home of William Still, who would write about Laird's escape and hundreds of similar adventures in his book, The Underground Railroad. Are we okay? Are we good? I think so. Thank you. No? Okay. Sure? Really? Right now? Right at this moment? Okay. I know. I know. I know. Finally, Laird Green and Mrs. Adams journeyed on to Elmira, New York, a place allegedly named for a young girl whose father loudly called her name every day. Many runaway slaves called Elmira's name too. Elmira was the place where Laird expected to find William Adams waiting for her with a preacher and promises of devotion. It also was the last Underground Railroad stop between Philadelphia and St. Catharines, Ontario. One historian has estimated that 1,000 fugitives passed through Elmira between 1840 and 1860. The geography of the area is the easiest thing to describe. Elmira just happened to sit smack in the middle of several river valleys. Once the Chemung Canal connecting the Chemung River and the Seneca Lake was completed in 1833 and railroad lines in 1850, the city had major connections with much of New York and Pennsylvania. The Elmira route to freedom started in Philadelphia and ran through Harrisburg, Williamsport, Canton, Alba, Elmira, and then to St. Catharines. I know, right? Crazy. That's like, this is like not the stuff they're teaching us as kids. Let's see. Some fugitives hiding among the cargo on boats and in railroad baggage cars continued to Canada, and others chose to stay in Elmira. Between 1840 and 1850, the city's black population jumped from 60 to 215. Come on, Nubs. Good job. Thank you. Because some of Elmira's older homes had been built with 12 and 14-inch boards or slabs, the black neighborhood in the center of town became known as Slab Town. Bounded on the north by the Lackawanna Railroad, on the east by Lake Street, on the south by Clinton, and on the west by the damn. That was like a mouthful. Where was I? Bounded on the north by the Lackawanna Railroad, on the east by Lake Street, on the south by Clinton, and on the west by the Chemung Canal. Yo! The neighborhood had its own special small town flavor and feel. In 1860, 243 free blacks lived there, according to the Wilson's Elmira Directory. most of them sharing bare single family homes. However, an observer emphasized that in its heyday, it could not in any sense be called a slum. Slabtown included a sprinkling of black owned grocery stores, churches, a meat market, and a tiny candy store. Anti slavery lectures and other meetings often took place in grocery stores and other public buildings. In 1848, famed abolitionist Frederick Douglass and the editor and publisher of the Arkansas Freeman newspaper came to the area in 1855. Oh, wait, I messed that up. Rewind. In 1848, famed and abolitionist Frederick Douglass spoke in Elmira, and the Reverend Tabbs Gross, a black minister and the editor and publisher of the Arkansas Freeman newspaper, came to the area in 1855. In the 1840s and 50s, Slabtown's main streets were Dickinson, Benjamin, and Baldwin. According to Wilson's Elmira Directory for 1860, a colored laborer named William Adams lived in a house on Baldwin at the corner of 3rd. The 1861-1862 directory shows a colored William Adams boarding at 186 Water Street. After their marriage, Laird Green and William Adams apparently lived right in the thumping, pulsing, laughing, story sharing, neighbor helping heart of Slabtown, the kind of community that television, cars, fast food, and air conditioning has all but wiped out. It was a neighborhood where people entertained with each other, a neighborhood where people ate food and just plucked from their gardens and still tangy with the smell of life. A neighborhood where, in hot weather, a breeze from the river provided the only air conditioning. A neighborhood where, in winter, people slept under handmade quilts so heavy they pinned you in place. After dark, Slabtown residents, including former slaves like Laird Green and William Adams, sat on their porches, spinning stories from the tangled threads of memories. Did Laird Green ever tell her neighbors about her escape from Baltimore in a sailor's chest? Did William Adams, a man who didn't always guard his tongue, talk about how he persuaded Laird to follow him to Elmira and become his wife? Or did they remain silent for fear someone might show up and try to collect the reward James Noble had offered for Laird Green's return? They must have chosen silence. Neither Laird nor William appears in any histories about Old Slabtown. Their neighbors do, though. Oh, how they do. Mr. and Mrs. Jeremiah George, former slaves, would sit with their neighbors at dusk and tell stories about the old days. Some tales triggering tears and others sparking laughter. More than half of Mr. George's anecdotes were really humorous, one man reminiscing in the Chemung Historical Journal, and the laughter of Mr. and Mrs. George themselves was loudest and rang out up and down Dickinson Street, a block east or west of Baldwin. His laughs graduated from chuckles into full-fledged belly laughs, and we children went to bed listening to these happy people. Another runaway slave who adopted Elmira as his home was a man known as Uncle John Smith, who had escaped from a Maryland plantation with 5 other men and found work with prominent families in the city. He died in 1898 at around 100 years of age after being attacked and bitten by a vicious dog. Meanwhile, many parents frightened their youngsters to bed by hinting that Wild Bill Jackson was on the loose. His claim to fame was a habit of earning drinks on Saturday night by eating ground glass, an activity some people apparently found amusing. Eventually, he died of his habits, according to an article in Chemung Historical Journal, and about everyone in Slabtown attended his funeral. He had never harmed anyone but himself. However, Laird Green and William Adams' chosen hometown was no untainted Edom free of snakes and sinful urges. Like other northern communities, it had racial discrimination and harassment and limited educational opportunities for blacks. Yet its residents and limited education, oh sorry, Yet its residents included powerful abolitionists like Jervis Langdon, a wealthy businessman who made his fortune in lumber and coal and spent some of it helping escape slaves. In December 1858, a year after Laird Greene's arrival, a near riot broke out in Elmira as residents tried to prevent an old slave from voluntarily returning to his former master. The man who had escaped through the underground had written asking his owner, John W. Mills, to come to Canada and get him to take him back home. When the man and his master stopped in Elmira on their way back to Calvert County, Maryland, an armed crowd surrounded the pair and tried to rescue the old slave, but the sheriff drove them back. The slave and his master got away only by running for and boarding a train that took them south. Yet the main reason Laird Greene and William Adams would have felt at home in Elmira was because of a black gravedigger named John Walter Jones. He became such a towering figure in the town's history that a museum bearing his name was taking shape in 2003. In 1844, John W. Jones and four other slaves escaped together from a plantation in Leesburg, Virginia. They stuffed their pockets with all the food they could, and one of them carried a pistol and a knife. They walked nearly 300 miles, with Jones and his four companions fighting off slave hunters in Maryland. In Elmira, Jones first worked as a gardener and laborer and later became sexton of the First Baptist Church. He moved into the Yellow House near the church, a house that would shelter hundreds of fugitive slaves in the decade before the Civil War. As the Underground Railroad agent at the Elmira station, he helped more than 800 other slaves escape. His allies included a bank president, a college founder, several lumber dealers, and a hardware merchant. In 1864 to 1865, John Jones became a legend for burying and recording personal information about nearly 3,000 Confederate soldiers who died in the Elmira prison camp, known as the Death Camp of the North. It was ironic that those dead who had enlisted in the Confederate Army to preserve slavery should have been buried by a man who had escaped from slavery and became a symbol of what a free black man could do. As they had planned, Laird Greene and William Adams married in Elmira, but they never moved on to Canada. Something about Elmira, Slab Town's warmth, or the presence of William's mother kept them there. Fortunately, the happiness Laird purchased with 18 hours inside a sailor's chest lasted for only a few green summers before death stole it. After only 3 years in Elmira, surrounded by storytelling neighbors and rich memories and welcoming front porches, Laird Greene Adams died. At around the same time, her mother-in-law passed away too. The causes of their deaths aren't known, but they passed away at a time when people died from everything from cholera to colds. Laird and William never had time to move from the flash of first love to the steady flame of a middle-aged fire. Yet some people can pack a lifetime worth of passion and pleasure into a few years or even days. They can love so much that their memories become like one of those heavy homemade patchwork quilts, so popular in Elmira, something they can reach for on chilly days and wrap around their souls. Maybe William Adams took such a quilt of memories with him when he left Elmira. After 1863, his name disappeared from the Elmira Street directories. He more than likely started over somewhere else. Yet he is not likely to have forgotten the two women who loved him enough to board a ship together and one spring day and sail through dangerous waters. He never saw the box that became his wife's prison for 18 hours. She left it in Philadelphia, discarding it the way larvae shed worn out skins so they can sprout wings. However, Laird and William's story is not just another Underground Railroad adventure or another example of those who wrote William Still purchased their liberty by downright bravery through perils the most hazardous. The story is a warning, familiar yet always urgent, to anyone who hesitates before plucking a handful of happiness and gulping it down. Don't just seize the day. Laird and Williams' romance reminds us seize the stormy or sunlit moment. One steamy day in May might be all the summer you'll see. Baltimore contains no plaques or statues commemorating Laird Greene's courage, and the Butter Depot from which she escaped closed its doors long ago. The space the old depot once occupied has become 504 South Broadway between Eastern Avenue and Fleet Street. In the spring of 2003, it housed a three-story nightclub with green shutters and a federal roof. A club flanked by shops selling edible underwear, homeopathic medicine, video rentals, tarot cards, and neon G strings. The prostitutes so abundant in Old Fells Point might have felt at home. Yet in a neighborhood haunted by the ghosts of famed orator Frederick Douglass, private ship owners authorized to plunder British ships during the War of 1812, and speedy slave ships like the Baltimore Clipper, the federal roofed building on Broadway only adds more history, more romance. It is easy to visualize Lair Green peering from her attic window at cobblestone streets, or descending narrow stairs to run an errand, or being shipped from the same port where blacks left the area going to Liberia. There are no monuments to her in Baltimore or in Elmira either, but she lives and breathes in the pages of William Still's The Underground Railroad, which contains a sketch of the girl he wow, which contains a sketch of the girl he sheltered and aided on her journey. It shows a pretty brown girl peering over the rim of a sailor's chest, and the look on her face tells her whole story, past, present, and future. She seems to be asking if, after the longest, steamiest, and most uncomfortable day and night of her life, she can now rise up from her box and grab some light and love. I like that one. But then she must have died from like complications of being in that box for so long. If it was hard for that man to do it this in 2003, but 18 hours in a box, love like that has to exist, right? Thanks for hanging out with me and tuning in. We'll be back next week with another story. If you would like to hire me, Symba Luna, for narration and voice acting, please email the Symba Luna Show at gmail.com. And I'll see y'all next week. Peace.